Order. Order. David Chadwick to move the motion.
Thank you. I beg to move that this House has considered the Groceries Code Adjudicator, and it is a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship, Mr Twigg. There is a deep unfairness at the heart of our food system. That unfairness stems from the power imbalance between producers and retailers. At one end, the retailers we buy our food from are making huge profits. Last year, the big four supermarkets saw a 97% increase in their profits. Tesco, 2.3 billion, Asda, 1.1 billion, Sainsbury's, 701 million. That's enough to convince anyone that there's enough money in the till to go around. And food prices, as we know, have soared since 2022. Yet Welsh farming incomes are actually falling. And that's a sign of a food system that generates huge profits for the supermarkets and the big retailers, yet the producers at the other end suffer what they must. Farmers and growers carry the risks of food production, but do not receive a fair share in the rewards. And the people who grow our food deserve to earn a decent living. And that's why the Liberal Democrats will keep campaigning to level the metaphorical playing field for farmers.
Will the honourable member give way, please?
Yes, of course.
Thank you. The Groceries Code Adjudicator was established by my party, the Liberal Democrats, in that sad time in government. This was an extremely important achievement designed to protect the interests of farmers and food producers. Some honourable members will know of my background as the director of the National Farmers Union, and my constituency of Tiverton and Minehead is home to some 1,600 farmers. In recognising that farmers are the lifeblood of the rural economy, would my honourable friend agree with me that the GCA's resources and scope must be expanded to ensure it can exercise its investigative powers and correct the imbalance between our farmers and the big supermarket chains?
I thank the honourable member for that intervention and for highlighting the achievements of the Liberal Democrats in power, particularly the fact that we have a long-standing record of standing up for rural communities. And the hills that Welsh farmers, the physical hills this time that Welsh farmers have to climb are getting steeper. Energy and fertiliser costs are rising, subsidy schemes are changing, and farm incomes are falling. To make matters worse, the government's family farm tax threatens to further strain their livelihoods. Those are just a few of the battles that farmers face. Their industry deserves a fair market, and it is for this reason that the Liberal Democrats introduced the Groceries Code Adjudicator during the coalition years. Yes, of course.
Forward, and he's absolutely right to refer to the importance of the Groceries Code Adjudicator. In my constituency of Strangford, of course, we are blessed to have many local suppliers and farmers who have created jobs and opportunity, and they supply to large shops and to supermarkets, and they're very much an integral part of the community. Does the honourable member agree that more needs to be done to ensure fair treatment, number one, that local suppliers can take advantage of fair payment and commission terms? We need fair play, we need fair prices for the products that we produce.
Absolutely. I thank the honourable member for his intervention. We need greater transparency down the entire supply chain and fair conditions for everyone involved in the food system. The GCA was established in response to multiple scandals where large supermarkets use their market power to take advantage of local producers. It has helped to improve fairness in the food supply chain. And since its introduction in 2014, the Groceries Code Adjudicator has made significant progress, and the number of issues around the treatment of farmers by supermarkets and retailers has fallen. It's my belief, and the belief of many farmers and producers I represent, that the Groceries Code Adjudicator needs to be strengthened, better resourced, and its remit expanded if we are to ensure fairness in our supply chain. I'll give way.
I'm grateful to the Ombudsman for giving way, because he's come to a very important part of the debate here. First of all, we need proper resourcing of the GCA as it currently exists. But secondly, there's a structural problem with the accountability chain here. The GCA effectively governs the relationship between the middle link, the processors and distributors, and the supermarkets. The 2020 Act deals with primary producers in that middle link. What we need now, surely, as well as extra resources, is a process by which the whole thing can be rewired together.
I thank the honourable member for his intervention. I agree wholeheartedly, and he will be aware that the levy that the supermarkets pay to fund the Groceries Code Adjudicator hasn't been increased since 2018, despite the massive increases in food prices and supermarket profits since then.
Would the honourable member want to give way?
Absolutely.
I thank the honourable gentleman for giving way. Research by Riverford Farms, based in my constituency of South Devon in November 24, showed that 61% of farmers are concerned that they won't be operating within the next year, but only 25% of them believe the claims that the Big Six grocers support British farmers. So would the honourable member agree with me that the Big Six need to do more to support our farming sector?
Yeah. I'd like to thank the honourable member for her intervention, and she's absolutely right to highlight the power imbalance that exists between the producers and the retailers, and it's quite right that she also focuses on the important research that is being done on this topic by organisations like Riverford, whose the evidence that they have provided has been crucial for helping us push forward the campaign for fairer prices for producers. So that's why it's my belief, and the belief of many farmers and producers I represent, that the Groceries Code Adjudicator needs to be strengthened, better resourced, and its remit expanded if we are to ensure fairness in our supply chain.
Would you like to give it? Thank you very much. I thank my honourable member. And as he mentioned, Welsh Government figures show that income fell in Wales for Welsh farmers by 34% between April 23 and March 24, and the dairy income by 59%. So does the honourable member believe that we should safeguard all future of food production in Wales? Welsh farmers should be able to rely on a fair deal for the products, and the regulatory bodies, as Elfyn Llwyd called for 10 years ago, should be made to support this. Thank you.
I'd like to thank the honourable member for her intervention, and she's absolutely right to draw attention to the plight of Welsh farmers at the moment. Their livelihoods are under threat. And that's why it's so important that we ensure greater fairness in the supply chain for them, to ensure they get a fair price for what they produce, and so that the government is fully aware of the impact that the potential tax changes it wishes to make will have on the rural communities we represent. Because rural communities are really suffering at the moment. We know that constituencies like my own are losing thousands of young people every year because there are fewer and fewer jobs to go around. And the long-term consequences of that are terminal, and that's why it's so important that we ensure that farming, which is the engine of the rural economy, continues to generate profit and jobs throughout the rural economy. The GCA has improved the rights of farmers, but producers still report bullying behaviour by major suppliers. A delay in payments. Sometimes farmers aren't paid, producers aren't paid, for up to and sometimes exceeding 45 days. No compensation for forecasting errors, delisting, changes to the orders placed and orders eventually accepted. Those are just a few examples of the ongoing mistreatment of producers. And it's a story of David versus Goliath. With 6 major buyers and 14 retailers covered by the GCA, the supermarkets have often been accused of using their collective buying power to force thousands of farmers and producers to plough on with prices that have fallen below the cost of production. Supermarkets helped themselves to a 97% surge in profits in the last year alone. They passed on higher prices to customers during the inflationary crisis, yet they are not handing on a fair share of that to producers. And I'm raising this issue after a local farmer told me how a supermarket went back on its pledge to buy animals he had spent years rearing, leaving him at a loss. And that's not a small loss for a local farmer. The costs involved in raising livestock to maturity are immense, and the losses when supermarkets change their mind are damaging to local producers. A recent survey on behalf of Riverford found that 45% of farmers feared going out of business, with 75% of those asked saying that treatment by supermarket buyers was one of their top concerns. Research from Sustain has found that only 5% of farmers want to sell to supermarkets due to having little say over prices and not enough connection to shoppers. The consequences of these unfair practices extend far beyond individual farms. The UK's food security is at risk when farmers are unable to make a living from their work. And as more farmers are forced out of business, we become increasingly reliant on imported food, which can be subject to price fluctuations and supply chain disruptions. This brings me to the role of the Groceries Code Adjudicator. Whilst the GCA and the Groceries Supply Code of Practice, which I'll refer to as the Code, are highly regarded among farmers and the rest of the industry, I often hear from local producers in my constituency that they feel that the GCA doesn't have all the powers it needs to fully level the playing field between farmers, producers and retailers. Beyond powers, there remains work to be done on increasing awareness of the GCA among farmers. Although awareness of the GCA and its roles has increased since 2014, it has stalled recently, and a significant number of producers still do not fully understand its role. More worryingly, many farmers still feel reprisals for reporting breaches of the code. A staggering 67% of farmers have reported fearing being delisted should they speak out about unfair practice by supermarkets, which means that there is almost certainly an underreporting of incidents to the GCA, which undermines its effectiveness. So more needs to be done to improve confidence in the system for producers and for the GCA to instil understanding and trust in its role. This also extends to the requirement for the GCA to have received a complaint to launch a report. People I speak to in the industry would like to see the GCA have the ability to launch its own investigations without having to rely on waiting for a farmer to report malpractice first. Examples of using this power in practice could include launching an investigation into the recent issues with Amazon or concerns over the chicken meat supply chain. The parameters of the GCA and the code are insufficient in an ever-changing food market. The inclusion of Amazon into the 14 suppliers covered by the GCA was a welcome move, but given Amazon's low levels of compliance with the code, it raises serious questions about whether other significant retailers who make less than 1 billion in revenue from the food system are falling through the gap. Likewise, there are serious concerns that food processors, packagers and manufacturers who act as the middle people between farmers and retailers are also falling through the gaps when it comes to regulation, despite collectively supplying over half of Britain's food. The GCA's 7 golden rules have been widely welcomed by the sector, and to protect suppliers, these rules should be fully incorporated into the code rather than being only guidelines. And this could happen quickly. Suppliers, and it needs to happen quickly too, because suppliers are continuing to experience difficulties in cost-price increase negotiations as a result of the ongoing inflation crisis we find ourselves in the middle of. The supermarkets are willing to use energy and fertiliser price inflation as justification for increasing prices for customers, but are seemingly unwilling to pay farmers a fair price that recognise those changes and the increased input costs for farmers. The government must strengthen the Groceries Code Adjudicator and the Groceries Code to ensure we have true fairness across supply chains. Firstly, the government can improve the visibility of the GCA and the awareness of its work. The GCA must give farmers the confidence to report issues and to know that those issues are handled confidentially, especially as many farmers feel they might be punished or blacklisted for making complaints. Secondly, the GCA only has 7 members of staff, including the adjudicator himself, yet is responsible for regulating an industry worth billions of pounds. The GCA's reliance on temporary and seconded staff hinders its ability to enforce the code. Giving the GCA a dedicated staff team would allow it to respond effectively at all times and to build and retain specialist knowledge. Likewise, the GCA shouldn't have to wait for a producer to report malpractice. If they respect retailers aren't complying with the code, let them launch their own independent investigations. We should also move to expand the remit, as over half of food being supplied by packages, processors, distributors and manufacturers, and several key areas of the food supply chain still fall outside of the regulation. The 7 golden rules that have been welcomed across the industry rightly welcomed across the industry, but many concerns remain that those are only guidelines set by the GCA rather than forming part of the code itself. Incorporating them into the code legally would help to ensure producers are fully covered when it comes to reports of unfair cost-price negotiations. Overall, the Groceries Code Adjudicator is improving the relationship between farmers and large retailers. However, as our food market evolves, so too must the GCA. By expanding its remit, providing additional resources and enhancing its enforcement powers, the government can ensure that the GCA truly works for farmers and producers and ensures fairness in the food supply chain. Let's give our food system the fair market it needs. Let's give our rural communities the support they need. And let's make sure that the GCA remains a strong and effective safeguard for the future of our food system. I look forward to other members' contributions and the Minister's response.
This House has considered the Groceries Code Adjudicator. Rebecca Long-Bailey.
Chairmanship, and I want to thank the Honourable Member for Brecon, Radnor and Cwmtawr for his fantastic speech. I'd also like to draw the House's attention to my role as the Chair of the Bakers, Food and Allied Workers Union Parliamentary Group, and I thank them for their helpful briefing today. Now, as we've heard, the UK grocery sector is shaped to a large extent by the huge concentration of power in the hands of the major supermarket retailers. They're competing to achieve the lowest prices, but also the biggest profit margins on key goods. But as we've heard, there's a limit to which suppliers can keep prices down through productivity, automation, or from sourcing cheaper input costs. The story that my honourable friend told was that of farmers and the pressures that they face. But the result is often a relentless downwards pressure on labour costs too, which has led to attacks on the pay and conditions of workers employed across supply chains. This race to the bottom has resulted in the proliferation of low-paid and casualised jobs and the growing exploitation of agency and migrant workers. Now, surveys of food workers particularly conducted by the Bakers Union have shown that in-work poverty has spiralled in recent years, with food workers worrying about feeding themselves and their families. But at the same time, staggeringly, the supermarket chains have continued to report huge profits and dividend payouts to their shareholders. And we've also seen rocket and feather pricing, where the cost of key items is increased excessively due to wholesale cost increases, but when those wholesale costs come down, the price on the shelf doesn't come down in tandem. So the role of the Groceries Code Adjudicator is an important one. The GCA's helped tackle some of the most abusive practices, such as unreasonable short-notice termination of contracts, abusive promotional practices, and other failures of compliance with the Groceries Code. But sadly, as it stands, the GCA is unable to intervene to protect either suppliers or consumers when it comes to supermarket pricing, putting the interest of short-term interests of shareholders above the wider public interest. Now, to this end, there's a few suggestions that I'd like the Minister to consider. Firstly, the existing powers of the GCA should be incorporated within the remit of a new groceries regulator authority, with a wider responsibility to protect the sustainability of UK suppliers and the interest of consumers. The new regulator should be given the power to introduce price floors and ceilings to protect suppliers and consumers from aggressive pricing tactics and exploitative price gouging. And secondly, restore and extend a sectoral collective bargaining framework for workers employed in the UK food supply chain to ensure decent pay and security. And lastly, introduce a statutory right to food into UK legislation to protect consumers and address the root causes of food insecurity. Now, in addition to these issues, very briefly, I just want to finish by drawing attention to another matter that causes concern, and that's about the impact of private equity acquisitions on the UK supermarket chains and food manufacturers. As Food Chain magazine has recently written, under private equity ownership, the strategic focus often shifts towards short-term profitability, which can lead to decisions that are not always aligned with long-term market positioning. For example, cost-cutting measures may involve reducing staff, limiting store refurbishment and cutting back on a product variety. Now, there are a couple of examples of major supermarket chains engaging in these practices recently, and many fear that this is just the tip of the iceberg. So to this end, I'd also be grateful if the Minister would consider launching a joint investigation across DEFRA, the Department for Business and Trade and the Competition and Markets Authority about the impact of private equity acquisitions of UK grocery retailers and the impact on the security and sustainability of the UK food supply chain. Thank you, Chair.
Andrew George.
Thank you very much, Mr. Twigg, and it's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. And I must congratulate my uncle friend, the member for Brecon, on a really excellent, very eloquent speech, which covered all of the issues, and also to the honourable member for Salford for contributing as well, very, very tellingly. The background that I have with this is that from 2002, I chaired what was then known as the Grocery Market Action Group, which had amongst its members the NFU, the CLA, ActionAid, Tradecraft, Friends of the Earth, and others. And it was amazing to have such a disparate group of organisations in the same room actually working together and agreeing 100% about the injustices and the dysfunctionality of the way in which the grocery supply chain was operating. And we presented to the Competition Commission a range of evidence which provoked ultimately an investigation in 2008, which then resulted in the Competition Commission proposing that a grocery code to drive fair trade through the grocery supply chain should be established. And in order to enforce that, the Grocery Code Adjudicator was then created to ensure that the code was applied and by those supermarkets, which I think in those days there were only 5, which actually had a turnover of in excess of £1 billion, which is what the recommendation of the Competition Commission was at that stage. So the background to this is that having done that and having worked for more than a decade to get the legislation through, obviously I have some skin in the game, as it were, which I probably need to declare. But I'm not trying to claim credit myself for this because it was a cross-party effort. Well, I suppose I should. No, but, and indeed, one stands on the shoulders of giants, and indeed, Colin Breed did tremendous work from 1997 to 2001, produced an excellent report called Checking Out the Supermarkets, which actually laid the ground for a lot of the work, which then went into the Grocery Market Action Group, and indeed Albert Owen and David Drew and others on the Labour benches were also very supportive and active throughout those years. I have to say that there wasn't always cross-party agreement, even within my own party, that we should intervene in the market in the way that was proposed. That argument had to be won, but ultimately we did. And the point at the end of the day, and the point which I think people understand in relation to the way in which or the justifications to why the Grocery Code Adjudicator and any kind of market intervention of this nature was actually needed, was because fundamentally we had a dysfunctional supply chain operating entirely to the benefit, or largely to the benefit, of the supermarkets. And what we were finding was that of course we had an agricultural sector, not all of which was benefiting from in those days European subsidies or any other public subsidies, but actually dependent on subsidies because the market had become so dysfunctional that actually public money was needed in order to prop the whole system up. And that was why if we have a functioning market, one can enable the agricultural sector to actually free itself from dependence on public subsidy, and that was largely what was behind what we were trying to do in those days. But of course, when the Grocery Code Adjudicator was established, and the code indeed was created, the intention then was only that it created a framework in which future governments would review its progress and then build on that framework additional regulations, or maybe to reduce those regulations, but certainly it provided the skeleton on which then further developments could happen, because of course you cannot anticipate all circumstances. But just to follow on the points which have been made both by the member for Salford and the member for Brecon, there are a number of improvements which I do hope that the government will look very closely at, and that is that the code should be applied throughout the supply chain, not just to the direct supplier to the supermarket. It was never intention of the Grocery Market Action Group that actually the adjudicator should only look at the final transaction between the ultimate supplier to the supermarket and the supermarket itself, because the impact of that contract was one which could be fed right down through the supply chain. The second was that actually third country suppliers, the reason why Tradecraft and the Fair Trade Foundation and so on were involved is because they were hoping that, and rightly so, that actually third countries could and should be involved. Then also, as my honourable friend said, that actually the adjudicator itself could perhaps, on the basis of market intelligence, launch their own investigation, and finally work alongside the Gangmaster Licensing Authority, for example, to use that intelligence to take matters forward. But fundamentally, we have the framework of something which can be developed and improved here, and certainly it shouldn't depend on seconded staff. You don't get commitment to the cause if you depend entirely on seconded staff, as my honourable friend said. So I do hope that the Minister will look very carefully at this, and thank you very much, Mr Twigg, for allowing me to speak.
We just have two more members to speak. I do want to call the front benches no later than 8 minutes past. So, Dave Robertson.
Thank you, Mr Twigg. Can I say what a pleasure it is to take part in a debate with you in the chair, and can I also thank the honourable member for securing this debate on what is a very important issue. I spent the whole of last Monday during recess visiting farms across my constituency, from the edge of Lichfield all the way up to Kingston. And actually several of the dairy farmers that I met last week, independently without prompting, raised with me the need to see dairy processors covered by the Grocery Supply Code of Practice. And actually, independently, they came to it and saying, one of the things that we can do to encourage and improve profitability in dairy farming is making sure that the GCA and the code is applied to those processors, the middlemen who buy their milk from the farmers and sell it on to supermarkets. The code, as it is designed to make sure that farmers get a fair deal, but because it only applies to those retailers with the annual turnover of £1 billion or more, it means that the 14 biggest supermarkets are covered, but some of those third parties who supply those supermarkets are not generally taken into the scope of it. And I think it's really important that as we look at this, British farmers, whether they're dairy or any other part of the industry where there are different processors, they must get that fair deal. That's what the code and the adjudicator were set up to establish, and it's one thing that we should be looking to make certain that we carry forward so that every single one of those farmers gets that fair deal. One of the things that strikes me is actually the NFU's call to expand the coverage of the code by decreasing the turnover limit from £1 billion downwards would mean that actually a lot of those processors would be covered. And I'd be very interested to hear the Minister's remarks on that, because I think that is a non-fiscal intervention that we can make that can drive profitability significantly into the farming sector and support the people who feed the nation. Thank you, Mr Speaker.
John MacDonald.
Say to the honourable member to St Ives, he shouldn't be so self-deprecating. It was an excellent piece of work and a good campaign that brought about the Groceries Code Adjudicator. It was possibly the only thing of any worth that the Lib Dems did in government with the Conservatives, but there you are. I just want to make a couple of very brief points because the Honourable Member for Salford, the Honourable Member for Lichfield, I think, and others have covered the ground very well. I'm a member of the Bakers Union Group as well. And in 2013, we welcomed the introduction of the Grocery Code Adjudicator, and we met a few times as well to talk about the individual issues that were occurring then. And if the members can remember, we raised the issue about the low-cost production, particularly of bread in particular, and it came as a result of the pressure of supermarkets. But my honourable friend for Salford raised the issue about private equity. If we thought it was bad enough when there were individual supermarkets of sizable status, we're now in a completely different world. The private equity is sweeping up these, and they're exercising enormous power. And I just feel the government needs to get ahead of this game. I feel it's almost as though we were in the residential care sector before private equity took over and leveraged those individual companies. And I can remember the collapse of a number of them. And I think we're in exactly the same position there. That's why the call for an inquiry, bringing in all the partners concerned, I think is invaluable at the moment. And I think it is important and it's significant that we need to think through the implications of this and then what we can then develop in terms of regulation. Bakers Union is calling for a new regulatory authority because it would give it more status and more resources, actually, as the member have pointed out. But I just think we need to understand the importance and significance of what's happening in the field at the moment. The only second point I want to make very briefly is the Minister that we've got here today is also the Minister responsible for the Employment Rights Bill that will be going through Parliament. My honourable friend for Salford has mentioned the issues around low pay. 80%, I think it is, in the Bakers Union survey found their members were struggling just to get by on basics like rent and heat and food. But on sick pay, there is an absolute scandal in this sector. The Bakers Union survey, and just quote very briefly, what they found was that protections for workers when they go off sick, 37% said they have to rely on statutory sick pay alone. And staggering, we found 13% received no sick pay at all. And as a result, some of them, I think, my view is they're forced into working when they are sick. And that's the last thing you want in this particular sector. So in the legislation, the employment rights legislation that's being brought forward, that I think most will welcome, it is important this issue of sick pay is addressed. And I know there are amendments being tabled as we speak around that particular issue. And I think it's something that in this sector in particular could have a direct impact on the well-being of these workers themselves. And the very final point for me is that if we are to move this forward, the new establishment of a regulatory authority is absolutely critical from the Bakers Union perspective. But the way in which that's democratically accountable is also important as well. And therefore, the engagement of not just farmers and the supermarkets, etc., it's key that the workers are involved and represented through the Bakers Union and the other unions that are involved in this sector so that we can plan out a long-term strategy for food production in this country that is not based upon low pay or exploitation of farmers themselves.
Thank you. Just before I call the front bench, I'll be calling the Minister no later than 20 past. So can I invite the Lib Dem spokesperson, Tim Farron?
Honoured to serve under your guidance this afternoon, and I want to pay real tribute to my honourable friend, the member for Brecon, Radnor and Cwmtawe, for bringing this speech and bringing this issue to this place, which is so important, but also making an excellent speech. In terms of the issues raised by the speakers so far, you know, great speeches, all of them, a number of interesting and useful interventions as well, but the 5 members who have spoken all made really good points that I want to endorse. My honourable friend who spoke about the imbalance within the market when you have very large numbers of producers. I mean, 1,500 farmers just in my constituency alone, thousands and thousands across the country, and what do we think, 12 retailers making up 97%, 95% of the sector. So an incredible imbalance of power, and of course, as others have referred to as well, the issues relating to the greater depth to the industry and the supply chain than the GCA is allowed to give credit for. My honourable friend talked about the impact upon farmers who, when it comes to potential delisting, the impact of late payments, having to pay for waste, all of those things which many still have to struggle with. Right Honourable Member for Salford made a really great speech and emphasise the power those retailers have in the market to and the irrational nature of the market, which leads us to situations where we see farmers going out of business, producers of all kinds going out of business, just because the large, powerful entities that own our supermarkets can do that in order to maximise their own profit. My honourable friend for St Ives absolutely deserves credit. The phrase supermarket ombudsman, which we used to call this, was a phrase I first heard from his lips before I entered this place, and when he was doing the job I am now doing, being the Liberal Democrats' DEFRA spokesperson, he fought hard for it, and it's the reason why in the coalition agreement what became the Grocery Code Adjudicator came to pass and was introduced by Liberal Democrat ministers, including my right honourable friend, the member for Kingston and Surbiton, but also Vince Cable and Joe Swinson too, who were involved in that department. And then the contributions from the member for Lichfield, who rightly talked about processors who are significant in this and often untouched by the arm of the Grocery Code Adjudicator. And last but not least, the Right Honourable Member for Hayes and Harlington, who talked about the role of ownership in the sector and also of the unfairness that affects the workforce within the retail sector, as well as those who are the producers who supply to it. And there is indeed an important thing for us to remember here, that those who are at the wrong end of the abuse of power in the food supply and the food chain are processors in broadly rural communities and workers in broadly urban communities, and they have a lot more in common than perhaps sometimes we are allowed to think. So just from my contribution here, yes, the Grocery Code Adjudicator is one of those things that the Liberal Democrats can rightly be proud of in coalition, and it was motivated in no small part from the simple reality that many producers, many farmers were being paid less than the cost of production for their produce. Most notably in my constituency in Westmoreland, but elsewhere in the country, those working in the dairy sector, but many others besides. Now, as all things were in the coalition, there were compromises, and even the good things we got were often watered down and wouldn't have been what they would have been had we had what will one day obviously happen, and that is a majority Liberal Democrat government. There are three, thank you, there are three particular areas of weakness with the Grocery Code Adjudicator, which we passionately believe should be addressed in the interests of our farmers and producers and consumers alike. First of all, the reach of the Grocery Code Adjudicator is too small in terms of its ability to investigate across the whole range of people involved in the sector. What I'm talking about here is, as has been mentioned, the fact that the adjudicator can investigate direct supply arrangements between farmers and retailers, but not get involved in the enormous majority of the food chain, which is in the processing sector, the middle people within the market. And the Grocery Code Adjudicator should be given that ability. That's an obvious to me. The second thing is about protecting farmers and other producers from the reprisals that they certainly fear they're going to have if they refer something to the Grocery Code Adjudicator themselves, which is why members of Parliament, the National Farmers Union, so the local branches in Kendal and Appleby, but across the whole country, the Tenant Farmers Association and other advocates should be allowed to make referrals to the Grocery Code Adjudicator so that farmers are not feeling that if they make a referral themselves, they will be victims of reprisals. They clearly fear that. And so those are the things we absolutely strongly support. And then finally, the issue of resource, been mentioned by other people, but the team is 7 strong, including 4 days a week of the adjudicator themselves. That's not right. They clearly have the capacity, however wonderful those people are, they have the capacity to be run rings around by the enormously powerful supermarkets. And I'm bound to say that the unfettered free market is indifferent to Britain's food security. And we need to be not indifferent to Britain's food security. We need to decide that it is of ultimate importance and that we therefore need to referee the market powerfully to protect our food security. Over the last 20 years, we have seen 30,000 farm holdings cease to be, a 22.7% reduction in the number of farms in the United Kingdom. That is undermining our ability to feed ourselves. Now only 55% of Britain's food is produced by farmers within the United Kingdom. If we are serious about food security, we are going to put that right. And as we challenge the government over the family farm tax, which the Liberal Democrats would scrap, and how that is suppressing production and it's creating unfairness in the market, as we see a 76% reduction in the basic payment this year, undermining particularly small family farmers in Westmoreland and beyond, as we see DEFRA officials telling the DEFRA Select Committee the other week that they expect 92 to 93% of farms to survive the ELMS transition. Yeah, what? So 7 to 8% of farmers not to survive that transition. All of that, and the land use framework, welcome in principle, but in practice, potentially taking productive farmland out of usage. All of that leads us towards a situation where the UK is less food secure. And the Grocery Code Adjudicator's reforms, which are overdue and are vital, are not just vital to making sure that British farmers are treated fairly, and they must be, but it's about underpinning the vitality of food security in this country, which is essentially national security. A country that cannot feed itself is not safe. Thank you.
I call the Shadow Minister, Dame Harriet Baldwin.
Thank you very much, Mr Twigg, and it's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship this afternoon. And can I start by congratulating the Honourable Member for securing the debate this afternoon on the subject of the Groceries Code Adjudicator. It will perhaps come as news to him that I was also one of the people who voted for this, because I was a member here in the coalition, and it was something that was put on the statute books back in 2013. And it's because our farmers wanted an adjudicator, Mr Twigg, to tackle that imbalance between small producers of food and big supermarket buyers. And we will always back our farmers for fairness and equity for food producers. The adjudicator regulates relationships between the UK's largest grocery retailers and their direct suppliers, and it ensures that excessive risks and unexpected costs are not being unfairly transferred. It brings fairer prices to the farming community, and it provides a guardrail to those smaller food producers who do not have a voice in the complicated food production market. It's funded by a pragmatic levy on designated retailers with a UK annual turnover of more than £1 billion, and there are currently 14 retailers who are covered by the code. And the results from the annual survey in 2024 show that the adjudicator is making a difference. More than 3,000 responses to that survey show that the number of suppliers experiencing a code issue has fallen to 33%, and the number of suppliers highlighting a retailer's response to a cost price increase as an issue almost halved, falling from 28% in 2023 to just 16%. For the first time, the co-op came top of the 14 retailers for overall code compliance with 98%. And the Co-op and Lidl both experienced a 2% improvement, which was the biggest percentage improvement across the 14 retailers. The adjudicator is there to protect suppliers like our precious farmers. However, we are concerned that the government's recent actions have done anything but protect our farmers. Food retailers and suppliers of all sizes are under huge pressure because of Labour's tax on jobs, its increasing red tape around jobs, the food inflation that we've seen, and the job losses in supermarkets. And Labour's family farm tax is yet another blow. It's a death tax on these important family businesses, and with no farmers in the UK, there would be no UK-grown food. Under Labour, the family farm will wither and die unless the Chancellor can be persuaded to change her mind. Because food producers are at the heart of our communities, and the government should be doing everything it can to support them, not harm them, and ensure food security in this country. The attack on our farmers is shocking in every way. The Labour MPs who voted for an inheritance tax on family farms simply do not understand where their food comes from. Labour is harming our farms, not prioritising our rural areas. It simply doesn't understand. On this side, we believe that good policy needs to be created in collaboration with the farming industry rather than in isolation. We've always kept the Grocery Code's Adjudicator under review since its inception, and we urge the Government to continue to do so. Thank you.
Call the Minister, and just to the Minister, to leave a little bit of time at the end for the honourable members to wind up, it'd be great.
Certainly, Mr Twigg, and it's a pleasure to see you in the chair this afternoon. Can I first of all thank the honourable member for Brecon, Radnor and Cwmtaway for securing today's important debate. I think before we talk about some of the contributions, I think it's probably worth just reminding the House of the role of the Grocery Code's Adjudicator, which I'll refer to from now on as the GCA for ease of reference. I think there's obviously a great deal of understanding here about what it does, but I think it's important to set the record very clearly about where its limits are. I think a number of members have referred to that. But the role of the GCSA in primary colours is to enforce the Grocery Supply Code of Practice, doing so by providing advice and guidance to both suppliers and large retailers on matters relating to the code, arbitrating in disputes between large retailers and their direct suppliers, investigating issues to ascertain whether there has been non-compliance with the code, and imposing sanctions and other remedies for breach of the code. The code, as we have heard, applies to the 14 largest grocery retailers in the UK, which have an annual turnover of £1 billion or more. And I understand that some members have referenced changing that threshold. I'd be interested to see what the effect of that would be, but that's a threshold that's been in place for some time now. It is a competition measure that is owned by the Competition Markets Authority and was put into place following a very detailed market investigation in 2008, which found that direct suppliers of groceries to large supermarkets were faced with unfair risks that adversely affected competition and ultimately consumers. And of course, as the honourable member for St Ives mentioned, and indeed a number of other members mentioned, it was not in any small part due to a great deal of campaigning from a number of groups and honourable members that the code saw the light of day. So it regulates designated retailers' dealings with their direct suppliers, which of course, as we've heard, does not include all of the farmers and primary producers. And while the code prevents the unilateral variation of supply agreements without notice, it puts limits on seeking payments for wastage and requires retailers to pay for goods on time, it does not regulate the prices agreed between retailers and suppliers, which is a commercial negotiation between the two parties. The code, however, does require that these negotiations are conducted fairly and transparently, and the GCA has been keen to ensure that negotiations around cost-price pressures do not lead to non-compliance with the code. In 2022, the GCA published the 7 Golden Rules to remind retailers of best practice when agreeing prices with suppliers, and all the regulated retailers have signed up to these rules. So as we've heard, the GCA was established in June 2013, and since then there has been strong evidence to show it has been effective in promoting compliance with the code and in changing the behaviour of retailers to improve fairness for direct suppliers. Improvements in retailer compliance with the code are evident from the annual survey, with average compliance with the code increasing from 75% in 2014, when the code was introduced, to 91% compliance in 2024. It is also positive to see that amongst suppliers there is a high level of awareness of the GCA and the code itself, although I did note that the honourable member who brought the debate said there was a question about awareness amongst some farmers. That's something I'm happy to explore further with him. Moreover, all 3 of the statutory reviews of the effectiveness of the GCA have concluded that the adjudicator has been a highly effective regulator. The next review will commence after the 31st of March this year, and we'll look at the performance over the last 3 years from 2022 to 2025. And I think, given what we have heard today, I would encourage honourable members and their constituents to contribute to this review. And I think the honourable member who moved the debate raised concerns about the remit and the resources of the adjudicator, and I think there's an opportunity for him to feed those comments into the review. He also mentioned what he described as bullying by supermarkets. Indeed, a number of honourable members talked about a fear of reprisals for raising concerns, and I think that's something that we obviously take very seriously. It is important to note, though, that the GCA has a statutory requirement to maintain supplier confidentiality. It has relaunched the Code Confident campaign and has launched a confidential reporting platform called Tell the GCA and published a Code Compliance Officer commitment to confidentiality. And the 2024 annual survey reported 82% of suppliers were aware of its commitment to confidentiality. That's, I think, a good report, but I think obviously 18% were unaware of that, and clearly there is a perception out there that matters can find their way back to the supermarkets. So I think that's something we can look further into. The honourable member moving the debate, and indeed a number of other members questioned why the GCSE can't instigate its own investigations. But I am told that it can carry out investigations of its own accord. It has reasonable grounds to suspect that a large retailer has broken the code or failed to follow a recommendation following a previous investigation by the adjudicator. And it is for the adjudicator to determine how he uses his powers, and he has issued statutory guidance setting out his criteria for launching an investigation. The adjudicator's four prioritisation principles ensure that he targets resources effectively and proportionately. Impact, strategic importance, risk and benefits and resources are all part of those principles. Certainly will.
Very grateful to the Minister for giving way, and certainly he's right, and originally, yes, providing it was on sound grounds. The worry was always that it may identify a supplier ultimately simply by doing it, and the anonymity which was intended when, if you like, an intelligence-driven inquiry or investigation was stimulated, may have uncovered that particular supplier. Therefore, a wider ranging, if you like, I mean, not on the basis of being able to conduct fishing expeditions, but certainly a wider range of powers to investigate on justifiable grounds is something which I hope the Minister will allow to be looked at further.
I hear what the honourable member has said, and no doubt that that's something that can be put in as part of the review. I think it's probably worth saying that when I've spoken to the adjudicator, he has said that his approach is actually about ensuring compliance and helping to prevent problems from escalating in the first place, and actually avoiding the need for formal investigations and formal dispute resolution. And he's said he's satisfied that his current powers provide the necessary tools to enforce the code and change retailer behaviour. He's also been very clear, and he said this publicly, that if he needs to instigate an investigation, he is more than ready to do so. And I think that leads us on to some of the points members have made about the resources of the adjudicator. My information is that there are actually 9 staff rather than 7, but I think the overall point is that that doesn't seem to be a great deal given the number of supermarkets and their purchasing power that we're talking about. But it is entirely within the adjudicator's gift to ask for more resources through the levy. If he feels he needs more, he can also talk to the CMA about secondments. That is something that I think is entirely up to him. And if there is a question that things are not happening because of resources, I am confident the adjudicator would come forward and discuss that with us. My honourable friend, the member for Salford, who rightly referenced her leadership of the Bakers Union in Parliament, and very, very proud to associate myself in my former legal career with the Bakers Union, representing on many occasions. I know how much they have done in terms of this particular area and how it affects their members. And she was right to talk about how the sector that they represent members in often is characterised by a race to the bottom with insecurity and low wages, and that is, of course, what we are hoping to tackle through the Employment Rights Bill. She also made a number of interesting suggestions about how we can move this forward, which I won't be able to respond to in detail today, but I do note that the Business and Trade Select Committee have recently begun an investigation into pricing practices, which is focusing primarily on dynamic pricing, but the evidence session I attended did cover a whole range of different areas where prices were an issue, and I think that's their report is something that I will be looking forward to reading in due course. The Honourable Friend, the Member for Hayes and Harlington, also referred to, as did the Honourable Member for Salford, about the use of private equity in the supermarket sector, and he was right to reference other sectors where this has become more of an issue. The CMA have recently looked at this issue in the veterinary sector, so it may be the case that actually they have already the opportunity to conduct an inquiry should they wish to do so. And I also noted my honourable friend's reference to the survey where 13% of those surveyed had no access to sick pay at all. We think that is absolutely the wrong way to go, and that's why the Employment Rights Bill will ensure that statutory sick pay becomes a day one right for everyone, regardless of their earnings. The Honourable Member for Lichfield talked about his dairy farmers in his constituency and how they would like the GCA to apply to their work. He may be aware that the fair dealing regulations affecting the dairy sector came into force in July of last year and will apply to all existing contracts from the 9th of July this year. So I'm going to put his comments forward to the relevant minister in DEFRA to see whether those regulations are something that are going to be of assistance in terms of dealing with his constituents' issues. And it is fair to say that the powers under the Agriculture Act 2020 are being actively looked at by DEFRA in terms of expanding regulations to improve fairness in the pig sector and also looking at egg and fresh produce sectors. So there are a number of other tools at our disposal to tackle some of the issues that members have raised. The dairy regulations are enforced by the Agricultural Supply Chain Adjudicator, and the ASCA, Richard Thompson, was appointed last summer. We expect that he will also deal with any fair dealing regulations in the other sectors that I've mentioned in future as well. And it is, I think, important to note that the ASCA and the GCA are in regular contact to ensure that the two regimes operate effectively alongside one another. And moving forward, we are going to conduct a review to understand the effectiveness of the fair dealing regulations. And of course, as I've already mentioned, there is going to be the triennial review of the GCA. I think members have spoken with great knowledge and passion about a number of issues that they would wish to put forward in that, particularly about the remit and powers of the GCA. I would encourage them to do that, and we will see what the review takes us forward. But I think the point that's been made about the importance of food security in this country and fairness to consumers and producers is absolutely the right one to be making, and I congratulate the honourable member for bringing this debate.
David Chadwick, to wind up.
Thank you, Mr. Twigg. Firstly, I'd like to thank the Minister for his response and his particularly generous offer of listening for further contributions about how we can strengthen the GCA. And I'd like to thank all of the honourable members for their contributions today. The member for Lichfield talked about the issues facing dairy farmers. That's also relevant in my constituency. And the honourable members for Salford and Hayes and Harlington talked about the impact on the Bakers Union and people employed in that industry, which is a reminder of just how far-reaching the food system is for all of us. And it is particularly important for farmers and primary producers, but the importance of regulating those relationships properly extends further than just those areas. And I'd like to thank the honourable members for St Ives and Westmoreland for their contributions, and I'm sure they join me in commending Roger Williams, the former Liberal Democrat MP for Brecon and Radnor, for the part that he played in securing the Groceries Code Adjudicator. There was clearly broad consensus that the introduction of the Groceries Code Adjudicator has been a positive step forward for British farmers. Fairness in the agricultural supply chain is essential, and it benefits us all, whether we are consumers, farmers, or communities relying on local produce. And it's still my firm belief that we must do more to strengthen the current regulations and improve the resources behind them. We cannot afford to sit back and allow this power imbalance between producers and retailers to persist. We need to ensure that bullying behaviour by a large corporation becomes a thing of the past. There's still so much work to be done, and I'm committed to continuing to press the government to work to introduce stronger measures to protect farmers and producers who are the cornerstone of rural communities and the rural economy that they support throughout this Parliament. So let's continue to work together to create a fairer and more sustainable food system that uplifts everyone from the fields to the supermarket shelves.
The question is that this House considered the Groceries Code Adjudicator. As many of that opinion say aye, or the contrary no, I think the ayes have it, the ayes have it. Order, order. The sitting stands adjourned. Thanks for your help. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.